Thus far, we have looked at commonly used HTML elements. We have looked at commonly used classes of or categories of CSS attributes. Now, in this lab, we shall look at a few more segments of CSS attributes that are quite commonly used in web page design. First, we shall look at text styling. This is one of the very important components that are used to make a web page content look attractive. So here we have a list of various text styling attributes that are available in CSS. The use models and the syntax for all these attributes are also given in the attached CSS file for reference. So we shall now show you how you can use some of these attributes to change the appearance of content, right? So let's start with this div with ID Mumbo Jumbo. You are required to experiment with all these attributes not only in the div element but also in the span element that is nested inside the div. So first, let me use a few of these attributes to show you how the appearance of the underlying content changes. So first, let's say we shall assign a color. Okay, so we assign a red color. Then let us assign a line height, right, with a value 15 pixels. Let us also add a decoration attribute, and finally a text transform attribute. Okay, so let's save and hit preview. Okay, so what have we done here? So first we've assigned a color red to the content inside the div element. So as you can see, the text now appears in red. Second, we've assigned a line height, right? So the line height attribute adjusts the spacing between two lines, right? Then we have suggested that the content should be underlined, and we've done that by using the text decoration attribute. So as you can see, the content is underlined. Now note that the underline attribute should not usually be used because intuitively, if you have something underlined, it is taken as a link, right? So I've used underline here just to show you how you can change the appearance by using suitable attributes, but the underline attribute is not recommended. And finally, what we've done is we've transformed the case to uppercase. Now let us change the line height attribute to a bigger number and see what happens. Save and hit preview. So there you can see your lines are spaced out much more. Cool so far. So now you must experiment with the remaining attributes, and as I said, not just with the div element but also with the span element. Now moving on to the next step, here we shall look at the attributes that are defined for fonts. Now commonly the attributes used for fonts are font family, font size, font style and font weight. The font attribute is actually a shorthand for all these lower level attributes, right? And the exact syntax is available in the attached CSS file. So what we'll do now is let us remove all the existing text styling attributes that we had earlier entered, and let me enter some font related attributes, right? So let's say we change the size of the font to 20 pixels, right? We and assign a weight to the font, right? So we'll save this and now hit preview. So there you go. So we have bigger fonts and bolder fonts. So if you recall, right at the very beginning, we had mentioned that the heading tag should not be used to just style fonts. Well, if you want to style fonts, make them bigger, make them appear in bold, and this is exactly what you should be doing, right? So once again, experiment with the remaining attributes and look at the attached CSS file for reference. Now let's look at background attributes. We've looked at background attributes in the past as well. Let us pay a little more attention to how they can be used. Once again, just like with the font attributes, you can also use a shorthand called background where you specify all the related attributes in the same line, right? So let's look at the CSS file here. So there you go, right? So as you can see, this is how you can specify all background related attributes in a single line and using the background attribute only, right? But what we'll do here now is let us try and assign just a color to the background, right? So let's say I want the background to appear in white. Okay. So let's save this. Let's hit preview. Well, it's not very visible, so let me just change the background to appear in gray. Okay. So once again, let's hit preview. So while it loads, so there you go. So now you have the background which has a different color from the rest of the page. Right? Now the background attribute is primarily used to either assign a color to it, or you can also insert an image as the background, right? So typically the way it will work is you can assign an image URL, or you can use a locally available image from your server. What you can also do is by using the repeat attribute in the background rule, you can make the image repeat one after the other in the x direction, the y direction, or both the directions, right? So these are two commonly used cases as far as the background CSS attribute is concerned. Now finally, let us look at the overflow and opacity CSS rules. Well, let us first look at what styles have already been assigned to our div. Okay, so there we go. We see that we have a width and we have margin, padding, as well as a background color. So what we'll do now is let's assign or override the width in the CSS with a smaller value, right? And a height, also assign it a height of the same value. Okay, let me make it slightly bigger. So we have a 200 pixel cross 200 pixel square box, so which will act as our div. Okay, so let's hit preview, and okay, great. So there you go. So what you can see here is that here you have the square box, right, which is 200 pixel cross 200 pixel. What I'll also do to make this more visible is assign a border, so you know exactly what we are doing here. Okay, so we've assigned a border. Let's save this and hit preview again. So there you go. So do you see what's happened here? So we have a 200 pixel cross 200 pixel div. We have content inside it, and the content actually overflows, right? It actually goes beyond the boundaries of the div. Now this is the default behavior which all browsers will show if you have a case like this. Well, so now the question is, how can you avoid it? Well, you can use the overflow attribute. So let's look at what happens if we use overflow as hidden. Okay, so let's save and hit preview. So now what you see is that the content is still not completely contained inside the div, but it does not overflow either. Okay, But what if you want a situation like this, but you also want the user to be able to access the content, right? So, well, what you're going to do is you're going to use an overflow with value auto. And what that will do is something we're going to see in a minute. Okay, so let's hit preview again. Yeah, so there you go. So now you find this scroll bar that comes up, and you can actually scroll down in the div and see all the content. Great. So now we've used overflow here. We can also use overflow dash x and overflow dash y to control the behavior in the x direction and the y direction respectively. Now let's look at the opacity attribute, which is once again a very commonly used attribute to alter the appearance of content on your web page. Now opacity is a keyword or a CSS keyword that is used by browsers such as Firefox, uh, Chrome, Safari, etc. Whereas Internet Explorer actually uses a different syntax to specify the opacity, right? So, since I'm using Firefox here, I'm going to assign an opacity of 0.5, which means that I want this content to be 50% transparent, right? Had I been using Internet Explorer, I would have used filter equal to alpha and within parenthesis overflow equal to 50. Okay, that could have been my syntax. So, alright, uh, so let's save this, hit preview. So do you see what's happened here? So the content is still visible, but it's kind of grayed out. So this is how opacity can impact the look and feel of content. So now what happens if I make it 0? So what do you think is going to happen, right? So let's find out. As the file saves, hit preview, right? So what you're actually going to find is that nothing will be visible, right? So you've made your content completely transparent, right? So 0 means that your content is completely transparent, whereas 1 means that your content has 0 transparency. Great. So just experiment with this particular lab. Make sure you understand how these different segments of CSS attributes alter the appearance of content on your web page. And finally, after this, you have the chance to create your very own web page with whatever you've learned so far, make it look nice, attractive, and publish it on Learn on Cloud.